Hi, I'm Holly. I write and teach the Bible studies here at Study with Friends. My background in this is a combination of formal education and my own personal study of the Word. I infuse perspectives from different systematic theologies when I think that would be helpful in rounding out our understanding of the text. But for the record, my formal education is from a Reformed theological seminary. I strongly believe that we should all understand the background of anyone who's teaching us about the Bible. So if you'd like, you can learn more about me at studywithfriends.org or zondervan.com. This is a group of real women doing Bible study and life together, and we're really glad you're here.
Okay, so this is a good time to take a beat and make sure that we're clear that we're not preaching the prosperity gospel. Because what we're not saying is that if you believe hard enough in God, you're going to have financial blessings and physical manifestation of his love. It doesn't mean that a third world mom who's, living in a hut is any less a recipient of God's grace and salvation and all of his spiritual blessings than someone who lives in a first world country like the U.S., even in the most poverty-stricken areas of our first world country. It looks very different than a third world country. And I think it's Jen Hatmaker who really said something that I loved, which was, and if I'm quoting the wrong person, I'll try to fix that too, but she said, if it's not, when you think about biblical truth, if it's not true for a single mom in a third world country, it's not true. Because God's blessings aren't just for first world America. So we should be cautious about applying promised land to some prosperity gospel. So we reject that handedly. So then what must that mean?
What if it's not prosperity?
If it doesn't mean I'm guaranteed a house and a nice car, that's my milk and flowing with milk and honey, what must it mean?
I think there is some level of promise of your needs will be met, not your wants. I think people who live in third world countries who don't have the safety nets under them like we tend to have in the U.S., they live in a daily dependence on God's provision more than we do. For the
physical provisions.
For the actual physical needs of their daily living. So they actually get to experience that provision more clearly. Not that there aren't Christians that go hungry. That's true too.
This is my point.
A
homeless,
but
hungry person
right.
can fully be experiencing God's grace and provision in a spiritual way.
Right.
And that's what he promises, through Christ.
Right.
Christ is sufficient.
Right.
And all through the New Testament we're reminded none of us are promised a life without trials.
Sure.
But we're promised that Christ is sufficient. And this is a continuation of the unconditionality of the covenants. And that's what I was really driving at. That, what I say in the homework is a concept that we should really grab onto, which is things that happened in the Old Testament in a physical way, a physical context, we apply in a spiritual context. So in the Old Testament, the Israelites had a physical promised land. And you're not wrong, that promised land has geography. It still exists. But God's journey that he took Israel on to get to the promised land and then take them out of the promised land, there was a reason for that, and it was for his glory, for him to be known to the nations and to the peoples of the world. It wasn't so that Israel could have a comfortable place to live, although that was a blessing he had in mind for them. It's a blessing he had in mind from the garden. When you think about the creation story in its plainest form is a story about land, descendants, and relationship. And we'll talk about that in depth a little bit in just a minute. But it wasn't because he wanted them to be physically comfortable that he gave them the promised land. It was because he wanted to use this people to show himself to the rest of the nations. And so we take that and we take that application in a spiritual and internal application. He wants our internal promised land to bear fruit, for our spirituality to have descendants, whether those are your actual children or people you mentor in the faith, those are your spiritual descendants. And so, and of course, a relationship with him that is an indwelling relationship, whereas in the Old Testament there were physical manifestations, the tower, tabernacle and the fire and the cloud. And so these are a lot of these Old Testament real world, three-dimensional concepts we now have to apply in an internal way, but the truth is still the same. The truth is that he gives me a spiritual promised land because he wants me to be set apart so that others can see who he is through me. Isn't that still true? The same way it was for Israel. So that's the kind of personal, I want us to be able to take it from this out there to an in here where we understand, oh, he's the same God. He's doing the same thing. He's just doing it in a new way. And does that make sense?
Yeah, this is, I was thinking, because as you were saying that, I was thinking of the idea of hindsight, right? So we have hindsight that we see what the land of milk and honey looked like before they all did. And that concept of foreshadowing that you were talking about earlier, right? So this is a foreshadowing. He's showing us a literal land as a foreshadowing for us in this time right now for the promised land, which is Christ and only Christ. And I would agree, yet that I had a conversation just yesterday, I think it was, that when you believe, then you get good on earth. And I'm like, no, we can't. And that is true for so many of us here in the United States because we have so many good, but it was the same way. Like, that's not true. Some people walk away from their entire family, their home, right? Their land, all of these things that they find comfort in, they actually walk away from to have the promise of Christ, which is so much better. So that he is the milk and honey. He is the promise to us that we can't get from any good here on this earth.
Anything on the outside.
Right. So, so that is our promise and that is our reminder. And I just think that he shows us this picture. And he's, as us, right, as the hindsighters, he shows us this picture of, see what I did? I promised this to them, and this is what it looked like. And this is, eventually, right, when you believe now, yes, that's true, but eventually also after, when there's a new...
You keep teasing at that already, not yet. Okay. No, you're good. We just haven't, we haven't articulated it yet. But the Christian buzzword of saying that is the already, not yet element of our salvation, of our spiritual experience, that we are saved, but we are yet to be delivered fully into the promise of heaven. It's a hard concept to think of, but actually when we think about it in parallel to these concrete examples in the Old Testament, it helps us unpack the Old Testament. It also helps us, I hope it informs our understanding of our New Testament experience. So I think what you're doing is exactly right. You're spot on, all of you, great comments. So more that you guys want to say about land, personal applications. I think we did good work there. Anything else?
I just think the actual land or home, Jesus specifically says, like, I'm building mansions for you. Like, when I go, I'm preparing a place for you. Like, I'm not lying about that, and it, in our perfected bodies, is it a physical place or is it just on a spiritual thing? I'm not sure. That's a good question, but it's, there is a home that you were alluding to, and
it's
a land,
prepared,
whatever
a prepared
the new
place
Jerusalem
for us to go.
will look like. It's,
that's great. You guys are doing a better job of applying this in a forward-thinking way. Okay, so we're going to move to descendants. Tell me what you think of when you think of biblical descendants. Biblical descendants. Just stick in that area if you can for a minute.
Mine is very literal. So it's very much like, because I really enjoy the Old Testament. So it's very literal, like in Numbers, it goes here to here, Adam to, and then it goes Abraham to here. Right. And I'm like, I'm trying to figure out these names and I'm trying to repronounce them over and over.
They're all men.
So for me, it was just thinking of biblical descendants. It was a very literal, like seeing the readings in front of me. And it's a very literal.
You like the genealogy.
Yeah. And I, because I'm a Kings, I'm sort of obsessed with the books of Kings. And so I write all these because it helps my brain remember. And so as I'm looking at the page, I'm writing all of these
genealogies.
Yeah, all these genealogies and all these names down. Kings. So because I want to connect, I don't want it to be, so far out there that I don't know how Noah connected to Abraham. I want to have everything in a way that visually makes sense to me.
What I love about what you're raising is that, so the Hebrew word for that is toledot, and that's the genealogies. And there are, I want to say there are 10 in Genesis, these 10 moments where God goes through the genealogies. And what's great about that is it shows us that this thread of descendants, there's a reason that God made sure that those, even though some people's eyes glaze over with the genealogies, you're making my heart warm that you're like, I love the genealogies. There's always like a quirky one in the group. and actually God loves them too, because he wants you to see what he was up to and what we're looking at here. And so even though I didn't do a ton with the genealogies in this study, of course we know they're peppered all throughout. And one of the things that I'll come back to in a minute, or maybe I'll just do right now, is how I'd like us to pay attention to what I was trying to think of how I was writing some notes before we started, how to describe this. So there's a couple ways to describe it. When God takes a lot of history, the way I describe it is how much real estate in the Bible does it take up? There's a reason for that, right? So if we look at all the genealogies, they take up quite a bit of real estate. But what you also notice is sometimes there's sort of a, I don't want to say fast forward, but I can't think of a better way to articulate it. But there's, as I said a moment ago, the primeval history of Genesis 1 to 11 covers a lot of chronological ground. Then what God does in his word is he slows it down. And when God does that, I think we have to take notice. So watch for those markers because the descendants are always like peppered in. So remember that that's one of the themes in the covenants and that it's a thread you can draw throughout. But also remember that usually right after a genealogy is an event because they want you to know what led up to that event or how God preserved the descendants to that event. And he sort of slows down time for a minute when you think about like Noah. So we have this whole chronological landscape, a lot of ground covered in Genesis 1 to 11. Then he slows down for Abraham. And then we move through another genealogy, and then he slows down for Joseph. And a lot of Bible real estate is taken up in these stories. And of course, we key in on these stories, which you teach in Sunday school. There's a reason for that because it's a moment he wants you to notice. And so I just want to encourage people like how to partner those genealogies if your eyes are glazing over. Like Numbers is a big one where people are like, I'm just going to skip past all of that and get to the whatever lights me up in Numbers. There's a reason all of that is there. And so I love that you lifted that up because I didn't really do that in the work here. So you're right, the literal biblical descendants. That's a great one. Anything to add? Because she pretty much covered it. Okay. So then if we change the word descendants to family, what feelings does that evoke in you? I love your family, so you should say something about your family because I do love all of your family. You feel like we better say something about your awesome family.
My family?
Yes, I love your parents. They're great people.
Great.
You know I'm a big fan.
Aw, I'll tell them you say.
Yeah, they know.
True. Oh my gosh. I mean, I guess I would say like warmth because like descendants is like make sure
And out there.
like make sure you have kids or else something wrong will happen. I don't know. But like your family is usually people that you love. Or at least even if you don't come from a family that loves you, like you probably still want to have a family that you love. Or, marry into one, become
Wait,
friends
pause
with
for
one.
1 second about what you just said because you said something huge there.
Okay, I feel like I know what I'm
You said, I'm going to feed it back to you.
Okay.
You said, even if you don't have a family that, I'm going to rephrase, even if you don't have a family that loves you well,
Right.
you still feel a desire for family.
True.
Did I say back what you were communicating?
Yeah.
I think don't run past that because that's kind of what I'm driving at here.
Okay.
I would like to think that we are all experiencing something in this room that represents healthy, joyful family relationships. But again, if it's not true for every person, it's not true. And so when we think about family, biblically, biblically true.
Mhm.
So when we think about family and we think about the concept of family, we can extrapolate that to we call our church family. We use that word pretty intentionally. Again, looking forward to the New Testament, God uses familial language. The early church used familial language. And we're going to talk more about how maybe you guys can talk a little bit about how maybe in your life you have someone who mentors you spiritually. So Marilyn is I call her my church mom, but basically she's someone who I think of as I feel like I'm her spiritual descendant. Like she's motherly to me, but she's not she didn't give birth to me. Can you say more about, if you understand what I'm saying? Does this resound with you?
Peter does that, right? Peter says, my son Mark. And I'm like, well, he's not his real son. He's not.
Good
So
point.
you have to work through that, right? And realize what it is. And I grew up in a family of non-believers. They're still non-believers. And, but we also grew up in a home that said, if it's not blood, then it's dead to you. So blood was thicker than water. And so, so my instinct fights some of that, church family thing. However, in saying that, I have found so much peace and joy and growth through my church family. I have a mentor as well. Her name is Cheryl, and she's not just brilliant, but I really go to her when I'm having spiritual issues. I mean, spiritual issues even with my kids, where I'm struggling with school and I need your prayers. And it's a heartfelt, like, I know she loves me as a spiritual daughter. And when I say brothers and sisters in Christ, like, I genuinely love these people, which for me is definitely unusual and a little bit of an oddity, because I think Carol and I have known each other long enough. We're not really huggy, like kind of like those people, but I have felt more of that compassion as I grow deeper into my church family.
So there's a warmth.
Yeah.
There's I think what you were kind of getting at is, we experience maybe in our nuclear family, but we also may experience in, Christian friendships, or even, let's be honest, you can have someone who feels like a brother or sister to you. That's not special to the church. People develop relationships that become like family, and there's a reason we say like family, because there's a bar. Family, the word family sets a bar. And that's what I just wanted to drive at, the idea of descendants, the idea of family, and how certainly we see that play out in the Old Testament, but also what does that look like in a believer's life right now? And what does it really even just look like relationally? Maybe you have this experience too. My daughters have friends that I think of like my daughters too. I mean, I'm not trying to step on their mom's toes. I know they have a mom, but when you have a kid who's been around for such a long time, you're like, well, she kind of belongs to me too. And that's the kind of stuff I mean. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Do you understand where I'm going with that?
And it's that ideal, it's not the perfect relationship. A lot of us have families where, there's some good relationships, but then there's that one, that one sister, that one brother, that one, troublesome aunt, or, whatever, that throw wrenches in the works all the time. But what God is like, but the ideal family is, Jesus, my son, and he chooses to use that language to describe.
So
the
funny. We were just
ideal.
talking about a couple of
This
these
morning.
things, and
Yeah.
we have a Bible study in the morning, this morning, and one of the things we said this morning was, even if you come out of a family that's broken and a mess, and it was never what it was supposed to be, there's something in you that knows that's not right.
Yeah.
So there's something in you that knows what family is supposed to be. And that's, I think, what we were
And we long for it.
Yeah, we do
Yeah.
long for it. Yeah, yeah. And
we always say, well, I don't want to repeat the errors of my parents. Like we always hope we're gonna do better for our kids.
Do you guys want to give me any of your reflections on how family and home relate to each other? And then we're going to go into reflecting on how God's love is exemplified in family, which we did cover a little bit. But if there are any other comments you want to make on those points.
Well, I think it's uniquely interesting that God gives us family, and he gives us family in our home, right? So, which seems relatively obvious, but where do you spend most of your time? You know, I spend most of my time with my husband, my kids, in our home. And so it's this,
Interconnected.
yeah, and it's this connection that grows with time too, because it's years and years of it, you know, of being in your home and being connected and developing memories, good, bad, indifferent. So I think that he works with that for a reason. And always just thinking about like remembering the blessings that he's given me, because I'm always like, he gave me all of you. So I need to not forget that he gave me all of you. And so again, good, bad, or indifferent. He gave me aunts, uncles, cousins, the crazy uncle that does the funky stuff. And it's like, but he gave them to me. And there's a reason that we have all these interconnections. So what do I do with it?
And so can you relate a little bit to Israel? And I'm going to say, let's not say once they got into the promised land. Let's talk about in the wilderness, if you're familiar with those stories. Do you feel like there's a connectedness that comes from experiencing that hardship together as a sort of a tribe, right? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they say in general, so you watch some of these shows and they say couples meet through tragedy, right? So I guess it would be very much the same. They would even see the miracles together, right? Their shoes didn't wear out. They, you know, fire at night, smoking. You know, they saw all
A manna
of these
every day.
Shared
Every
experiences.
day,
So
these
that's
shared
exactly what I was going for,
experiences,
because
yeah.
you were talking about shared experiences in your home
Right.
with your family, and that's exactly what I was
Yeah.
going at. You have this shared experience with the people that you went through it,
Yeah.
you know, together. And it's like that, you know, with brothers and sisters, good, bad, or indifferent, whether you were raised in a good home, raised in a bad home, there's something about your siblings that like nobody really gets it like they do, right? So these are the things that we can kind of extrapolate from Israel's experience. I just want to make those a little more personal. Any other questions?
I
or
just was
comments
thinking
on-
they all either would go good together or they'd all go bad
Yeah.
together
Yeah.
very quickly, you know. They have these fantastic experiences with Moses, and then all of a sudden they're building the golden calf, and Moses is like, I was gone for like a month. What happened? You're
was gone for like a
what
minute.
happened to you people? You
Just
know?
left this house.
And then you wonder, how did like 1 million people all turn so bad so quickly, you know?
Do you really have to wonder though? I don't, because my heart turns so quickly. It's very easy for me to understand. I can turn.
I can see the individual, but to get a whole nation to turn that quickly is a
This is
little-
exactly what we're going to look at, though. How the trajectory of their experiences and some of the elements of their experience. Foreshadowing into the former prophets and the latter prophets, their leadership. You know, under Moses, that's a vacuum experience that actually foreshadows judges, kings, and the prophets, because Moses left for a minute. Their leadership wasn't there. Their solid leadership. They lost themselves, and he comes back, and you know, with some repercussions, appropriate repercussions.
Right.
Leadership matters.